everybody, it's Miss Deighton here. I've decided to read to you one of my absolute favourite David Walliams books, and that is Mr. Stink. And did you know David Walliams is also reading his own books live on his website, which is really cool. So if you wanted to listen to the actual author of this book read many of his different amazing stories, please check out his website with your grown-ups, because I think you'd really enjoy that. Okay? So, Mr. Stink. Chapter 1 is called Scratch and Sniff. Mr. Stink stank. He also stunk. And if it is the correct English to say he stinked, then he stinked as well. He was the stinkiest stinky stinker who ever lived. A stink is the worst type of smell. A stink is worse than a stench, and a stench is worse than a pong, and a pong is worse than a whiff, and a whiff can't be enough to make your nose wrinkle. If it wasn't Mr. Stink's fault that he stank, he was a tramp. After all, he didn't have a home, and so he never had the opportunity to have a proper wash, like you and me. After a while, the smell just got worse and worse. Here is a picture of Mr. Stink. He's quite a snappy dresser, in his bow tie, his tweed jacket, isn't he? But don't be fooled. The illustration doesn't do justice to the smell. This could be a scratch and sniff book, but the smell would be so bad that you would have to put it in the bin and then bury the bin very deep underground. That's his little black dog with him, the Duchess. The Duchess wasn't any particular breed of dog. She was just a dog. She smelt too. But not as bad as Mr. Stink. Nothing in the world really smelled as bad as him. Except his beard. His beard was full of old bits of egg and sausage and cheese that had fallen out of his mouth years before. It had never ever been shampooed, so it had its own special stink, even worse than his main one. One morning, Mr. Stink simply appeared in the town and took up residence on an old wooden bench. No one knew where he'd come from or where he might be going. The townfolk were mostly nice to him. They sometimes dropped a few coins at his feet before rushing off with their eyes watering. But no one was really friendly to him. Nobody stopped for a chat. At least, not until the day that a little girl finally plucked up the courage to speak to him. And that's where our story begins. "Hello," said the girl, her voice trembling a little with nerves. The girl was called Chloe. She was only 12, and she had never spoken to a tramp before. Her mother had forbidden her to speak to such creatures. Her mother even disapproved of her daughter talking to kids from the local council estate. But Chloe didn't think Mr. Stink was ever a creature. She thought he was a man who looked like he had a very interesting story to tell. And if there was one thing that Chloe loved, it was stories. Every day, she would pass him and his dog in her parents' car on the way to their posh private school. Whether it was in the sunshine or the snow, he was always sitting on the same bench with his dog by his feet. As she sat on the leather of her back seat with her poisonous little sister Annabelle, Chloe would look out the window with him and wonder. Millions of thoughts and questions would swim through her head. Who was he? Why did he live on the streets? Had he ever had a home? What did his dog eat? Did he have any friends or family? And if so, did they know that he was homeless? Where did he go at Christmas? If you wanted to write him a letter, what address would you put in the envelope? The bench? You know, the one round the corner? From the bus stop? When was the last time he'd even had a bath? And could his name really be Mr. Stink? Chloe was the kind of girl who loved being alone with her thoughts. She would often sit on her bed and make up stories about Mr. Stink. Sitting on her own in the room, she would come up with all kinds of fantastic tales. Maybe Mr. Stink was a heroic old sailor who had won dozens of medals for bravery, but had found it impossible to adapt to life on dry land. Or perhaps he was a famous opera singer who one night, upon hitting that top note in the Royal Opera House in London, lost his voice and could never ever sing again. Or maybe he was a Russian secret agent who had put on an elaborate tramp disguise to spy on the people of the town. Chloe didn't know anything about Mr. Stink, but what she did know on that day when she stopped to talk to him for the first time was that he looked like he needed the £5 note she was holding much more than she did. He seemed a bit lonely too. Not just alone, but lonely in his soul. And that made Chloe sad. She knew full well what it was like to feel lonely. She didn't like school that much. Her mum had always insisted on sending her to a posh all-girls school. She hadn't made any friends there. Chloe didn't like being at home much either. Wherever she was, she had the feeling that she didn't quite fit in. What's more, it was Chloe's least favourite time of the year, Christmas. Everyone is supposed to love Christmas, especially children. But Chloe hated it. She hated the tinsel, she hated the crackers, she hated the carols, she hated having to watch the Queen's speech, and she hated the mince pies. She hated that it never really snowed like it's supposed to, and she didn't like sitting down with her family for a long, long dinner. And most of all, she hated how she had to pretend to be happy just because it was December the 25th. "What can I do for you, young lady?" said Mr. Stink. His voice was unexpectedly posh. As no one had ever stopped to talk to him before, he stared slightly suspiciously at this plump little girl. Chloe was suddenly a bit frightened. Maybe it wasn't such a good idea to talk to the old man after all. She had been working up to this moment for weeks, months even. This wasn't how it had played out in her head. And to make matters worse, Chloe had to stop breathing through her nose. The smell was starting to get to her. It was like having a living thing creeping its way up her nostrils, burning the back of her throat. I can't wait to find out what happens next. Do you think Chloe and Mr. Stink might become friends? I hope so. Okay, see you later. Stay safe. Enjoy time with your grown-ups.